पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ बहुत सारे महाज खुले, कुछ हमने खुद खोले और काफी सारे हमारे खिलाफ खोले गए। आज का महाज टेम्परेचर के नाम। वैसे तो अमेरिका में टेम्परेचर गिर रहा है, सर्दियां होने को हैं, मगर वॉशिंगटन डीसी में पाकिस्तान के लिए कम से कम 1-2 दर्जा हरारत टेम्परेचर बढ़ गया है। आज ही वॉशिंगटन में 11 डेमोक्रेट्स इधर की रूलिंग पार्टी हैं, 11 डेमोक्रेट्स ने एक खत लिखा है अमरीकी वजारत खारजा को। उस खत में क्लियरली कहा है कि पाकिस्तान में पिछले साल 1.5 साल से ज्यादतियां हो रही हैं। कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनली पाकिस्तान में इस वक्त बराबरी नहीं है और पाकिस्तान को एक खास अमरीकी कानून के तहत पाकिस्तान की फौज को या उसके पर्टिकुलर यूनिट्स को लेही अमेंडमेंट के तहत उसको जितनी भी इमदाद है वो फौरी तौर पे बंद कर दी जाए और इमरान खान का जो ट्रायल हो रहा है उसमें अमरीकी रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स, अमरीकी मॉनिटर्स भेजे जाएं ताकि एक तो वो ट्रायल पूरा हो कंप्लीट शफाफियत से और फिर अनकरीब फरवरी में होने वाले इलेक्शंस में भी फ्री और फेयर इलेक्शंस हों। अब ये लेटर इंपॉर्टेंट क्यों है? आज का मुद्दा, आज का महाज आपको ये एक्सप्लेन करेगा, मगर सबसे पहले शेयर करें, लाइक करें, सब्सक्राइब करें और कमेंट करें ताकि आपको समझ आए कि पाकिस्तान में होने वाले अनकरीब इलेक्शंस, पाकिस्तान में होने वाला इमरान खान का ट्रायल और पाकिस्तान में आपके साथ होने वाला जो सलूक है वो वॉशिंगटन में या वॉशिंगटन से कैसे चेंज होगा। पहले तो चलते हैं कि लेटर किसने लिखा है, क्यों लिखा है और काय को लिखा है और इसमें क्या है। लेटर के जो मुसन्निफ हैं, उनकी जो लीडर्स हैं, वो रिप्रेजेंटेटिव इल्हान उमर हैं, ये मुसलमान रिप्रेजेंटेटिव हैं मिनेसोटा की, और रिप्रेजेंटेटिव ग्रेग सिजार हैं टेक्सास के। ये जो हैं ये लीडर्स हैं लेटर के, इन्होंने मेन ऑथर्स हैं लेटर के को साइनर्स जो हैं वो कोरी बुश हैं मिजूरी की डेमोक्रेट, एंड्रे कार्सन हैं इंडियाना के डेमोक्रेट, वाकिन कैस्ट्रो हैं टेक्सास के डेमोक्रेट, लॉयड डॉगेट हैं टेक्सास के डेमोक्रेट, समर ली हैं पेंसिल्वेनिया की डेमोक्रेट, टेड लू हैं कैलिफोर्निया के डेमोक्रेट। ये हरगिज डोनाल्ड लू के भाई या दोस्त या कजन या यार नहीं है, ये कैलिफोर्निया से ताल्लुक रखते हैं। जिम मगावन मेरीलैंड के डेमोक्रेट, फ्रैंक पलोन न्यू जर्सी के डेमोक्रेट और डीना टाइटस नेवाडा की डेमोक्रेट। मैंने इन रियासतों का नाम इसलिए लिया है क्योंकि पिछले कुछ महीनों में पाकिस्तानी अमेरिकन कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि अपने जो लोकल लीडर्स हैं, लोकल रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स हैं, उनको कन्विंस करें कि वो वॉशिंगटन जाएं और वॉशिंगटन में जाके शोर मचाएं और पाकिस्तानियों के साथ उनके जो पीछे दोस्त अहबाब रिश्तेदार अजीज़ो क़रीब रह गए हैं उनके लिए आवाज उठाएं कि पाकिस्तान की जो हुकूमत वक्त है, जो एस्टैब्लिशमेंट है, उसको ये बाइडेन रेजीम, बाइडेन एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन उसको सपोर्ट करना बंद करे और पाकिस्तान के आम शहरियों के साथ जो हो रहा है उस सलूक को भी बंद करे। अब सवाल ये बनता है, क्या ये लेटर उन हजारों पाकिस्तानी अमेरिकन की कोशिशों से की वजह से लिखा गया है? क्या ये उनकी मेहनत का नतीजा है? हमें ये नहीं पता, क्योंकि कभी भी कांग्रेसमैन या कांग्रेस वुमन कभी ये नहीं लिखेगा या लिखेगी कि हाँ जी हमें हमारे जो पाकिस्तानी शहरी हैं, हमें ये जो वोटर्स हैं वो ये कह रहे हैं। ये ऐसे डिस्क्लोज नहीं होता। मगर इसमें कोई शक नहीं है कि जो तमाम रियासतों के मैंने नाम लिखे हैं, इसमें कई रियासतें, टेक्सास, न्यू जर्सी, कैलिफोर्निया, मेरीलैंड, इन सब में ऑफ कोर्स ठीक ठाक पाकिस्तानी कम्युनिटीज हैं। और वो जो पाकिस्तानी कम्युनिटीज हैं उनमें भी अगर आप, वैसे तो कोई एविडेंस नहीं है, मगर अगर आप एनेक्डोटली इसे देखें, अगर जाके आप घूमे फिरें टुरें, जैसे मैं घूमता फिरता और टुरता हूं, तो समझ आ जाती है कि ज्यादातर इस वक्त पाकिस्तानी अमेरिकन प्रो इमरान खान है, वो इमरान खान के हक में है, वो आप के हक में है। अब ये हमें नहीं पता कि किस का नतीजा है, किसकी मेहनत का नतीजा है, मगर लेटर लिख दिया गया है और ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट डेमोक्रेट्स हैं जिन्होंने ये लेटर लिखा है। लेटर में अब लिखा क्या है, इसकी तरफ चलते हैं। लेटर में मेन जो मुद्दा है लेटर का कि ये जो पाकिस्तान में जो ह्यूमन राइट्स वायलेशंस हो रहे हैं उनके बारे में ये डेमोक्रेट्स डीपली कंसर्न्ड है। मगर लेटर पहले भी लिखे गए हैं, ये लेटर कैसे अलग है? वेल, बिकॉज ये लेटर एक खास कानून लेही लॉ या लेही अमेंडमेंट को साइट करता है और कहता है कि पाकिस्तान की फौज पे, पाकिस्तान की पुलिस पे, पाकिस्तान की इंटेलिजेंस एजेंसीज पे अगर वो मुलव्वस हैं पाकिस्तान में लाकानूनियत में, पाकिस्तान में जो जुल्म हो रहा है उसमें, तो फिर उन पे लेही अमेंडमेंट लागू होती है। लेही अमेंडमेंट क्या है? ये एक यूएस गवर्नमेंट की 1997 की अमेंडमेंट है जो मिलिट्री असिस्टेंस, जो बैनुल अक़वामी सिक्योरिटी फोर्सेस हैं, इंटरनेशनल फॉरेन सिक्योरिटी फोर्सेस हैं, उन पे ये उनकी मिलिट्री असिस्टेंस बंद कर देती है। इसमें मिलिट्री एड मतलब इमदाद, इक्विपमेंट मतलब के गोला बारूद, ट्रेनिंग और किसी किस्म की असिस्टेंस जैसे इंटेलिजेंस वगैरह बंद कर दी जाती है अगर शक हो या सबूत हो कि ये किसी भी किस्म के ह्यूमन राइट्स वायलेशंस में इन्वॉल्व हैं। इसमें स्पेसिफिकली पूरी फौज या पूरी एयरफोर्स या पूरी नेवी या पूरी पुलिस या पूरी आईएसआई पे नहीं लग सकता। जरूरी लग भी सकता है मगर जरूरी नहीं है, मगर उनके एक खास यूनिट में भी लग सकता है। फॉर एग्जाम्पल, अगर कल सबूत निकले कि पाकिस्तान रेंजर्स ने जिस तरीके से इमरान खान को अरेस्ट किया, उसके साथ बदतमीजी की, उसको मारा, उसके साथ ज्यादती की, अगर ये सवाबित निकले तो पाकिस्तान रेंजर्स पंजाब पे लेही अमेंडमेंट लग सकती है। अगर कल शक हो या सवाबित मिले कि एफआईए ने खदीजा शाह के लिए खास चीटिंग करके, ड्रामा करके उसके खिलाफ खास एक केस बनाया जिसके तहत उसकी सजा और आगे हो गई, तो इसमें भी इनके ऊपर एफआईए का जो साइबर क्राइम्स ब्यूरो है, जिसने खदीजा के खिलाफ वाकई ही एक केस बनाया हुआ है साइबर बुलिंग का पीकल ऑर्डिनेंस के तहत, तो उन पे भी, उस यूनिट पे भी, एफआईए के साइबर क्राइम यूनिट पे भी लग सकता है लेही अमेंडमेंट। अगर खबर निकले कि आईएसआई के डायरेक्टरेट सी ने, जिसे मेजर जनरल फैसल नसीर साहब चलाते हैं, कि आईएसआई के डायरेक्टरेट सी ने ये पूरा ड्रामा रचाया और फर्ज करें शेख रशीद या किसी और पीटीआई लीडर को, फवाद चौधरी को उठवा लिया, गलत उठवाया, मारा, पीटा वगैरह, तो या जनरल फैसल नसीर या उनके पूरे यूनिट जो डायरेक्टरेट सी है उसके ऊपर भी ये जो लेही अमेंडमेंट है ये लागू हो सकता है। जरूरी नहीं कि पूरी पाक अफवाज, पाक बैरिया, पाक एयरफोर्स के ऊपर लगे। खास पंजाब पुलिस, एफसी खैबर पख्तूनख्वा, एफसी बलोचिस्तान का फलाना विंग, उस यूनिट तक ये जो लॉ है ये लग सकता है। कोई शक नहीं है कि इस वक्त इस लेटर की वजह से जीएचक्यू में जो कंसर्न्स हैं वो रेज हुए होंगे, क्योंकि इस लॉ के तहत एक्स्ट्रा जुडिशियल किलिंग्स, एनफोर्स्ड डिसअपेरेंसेस एंड अबडक्शंस, रेप, टॉर्चर, ज्यादती वगैरह हर चीज कवर होती है। अब क्या हमें पता है कि जीएचक्यू क्या सोच रहा है? ऑब्वियसली हमें पता है कि जीएचक्यू यही सोच रहा है कि ये लेटर कितना आगे जाएगा, क्या ये लेटर पॉलिसी बनेगा? आप भी यही सोच रहे होंगे, जनरल फैसल नसीर साहब भी यही सोच रहे होंगे, आईजी पंजाब साहब भी यही सोच रहे होंगे, डीजी रेंजर्स पंजाब साहब भी यही सोच रहे होंगे कि यार ये अगर लग गया तो उसमें मेरी पुलिस और मेरा वीजे और मेरे ट्रैवल और मेरी बिजनेस और मेरी चीजें तो नहीं बंद हो जाएंगी। अब फिर भी अब मैं कहूंगा कि उनको थोड़ा सा रिलैक्स करना चाहिए, क्योंकि अभी अर्ली डेज हैं, अभी ये लेटर सिर्फ लिखा गया है, मगर ये लेटर आगे जाके क्या कानून बन सकता है? ये लेटर आगे जाके क्या पॉलिसी बन सकता है? इसका सवाल वॉशिंगटन से ही निकलेगा। और आज हमारा जो शो है आपको वॉशिंगटन की तरफ ले चलेगा। ये स्टोरी रिपोर्ट की है द इंटरसेप्ट के मुर्तजा हुसैन और रायन ग्रिम ने। रायन ग्रिम हमारे शो में हमारा साथ देंगे, मगर इससे पहले कि मैं रायन ग्रिम की तरफ चलूं, आपको मोटा मोटा बता दूं कि वॉशिंगटन में ओवरऑल क्या हो रहा है। वॉशिंगटन में ओवरऑल यह है कि पाकिस्तान इस वक्त कोई कॉन्वर्सेशन पीस नहीं है। इस वक्त वॉशिंगटन में एक तो इलेक्शन सीजन है, इस मुल्क में खुद इलेक्शन हो रहा है, तो ये अपनी सियासत में गुमे हुए हैं, और साथ साथ ऑफ कोर्स इजराइल की जो जारियत है, इजराइल की जो ज्यादती है, इजराइल की जो जंग है, फलस्तीनियों के ऊपर जो वो कर रहा है जुल्म, वो इस वक्त वॉशिंगटन में डिबेट हो रहा है। डिबेट क्या हो रहा है? पाकिस्तान कहीं से वॉशिंगटन में इशू नहीं है, मगर 11 डेमोक्रेट्स ने ये लेटर इस वक्त पे लिखा है जिस वक्त ह्यूमन राइट्स का इशू जो है वो इस वक्त वॉशिंगटन में गर्दिश कर रहा है। वॉशिंगटन अंडर प्रेशर है कि उसका जो एक नीम गरम एटीट्यूड है दुनिया के उन ममालिक के लिए, चाहे वो इजराइल हो या चाहे वो पाकिस्तान हो, कि जो अपने लोगों के साथ या और लोगों के साथ ज्यादती करते हैं, जुल्म करते हैं, उनके लिए इमदाद, उनके लिए सपोर्ट, उनके लिए किसी किस्म की जो पॉलिसी है जो उनके लिए प्रो है उसको बंद कर दिया जाए, उसको रोक दिया जाए। अब क्योंकि ह्यूमन राइट्स इस वक्त वॉशिंगटन में डिबेट है, इसलिए ये लेटर इधर लिखा गया है। इस लेटर का मतलब क्या है, ये लेटर आगे स्पीड पकड़ेगा या नहीं पकड़ेगा, इस लेटर से पाकिस्तान मिलिट्री के सीनियर अफसरान, पाकिस्तान पुलिस के सीनियर अफसरान, पाकिस्तान के इंटेलिजेंस कम्युनिटी के सीनियर अफसरान क्या मुतासिर होंगे, और मोर इंपॉर्टेंटली, वेरी इंपॉर्टेंटली, अनकरीब में होने वाला जो इमरान खान का ट्रायल है, क्या उसमें अब अमरीकी हुकूमत के रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स आके बैठेंगे? ये बड़े बड़े सवाल हैं। इन सवालों का जवाब मैं अकेला नहीं दे सकता। इन सवालों का जवाब देने के लिए मैं आपको लेके चलता हूं वॉशिंगटन में रायन ग्रिम के पास। इनका मैंने इंटरव्यू किया, इनसे मैंने 5-6 सवाल पूछे, जो सवाल मैंने इधर भी पूछे हैं। आए मेरा साथ दें, वॉशिंगटन चलते हैं, एंड लेट्स कैच द इंटरव्यू टुगेदर। Okay, so naturally, to follow up on that story, we have to pivot to Washington, where I am joined by Ryan Grimm, a reporter for The Intercept, which has done this story also, the writer of the upcoming book, The Squad, AOC and the Hope of a Political Revolution. Ryan, welcome back to the show.
Good to be back here.
All right. Okay. So give me the big picture here, like I'm 5. So many congressional leaders have written so many letters over the last few months, some admonishing what Pakistan's doing, some asking the US to do something or the other. This one is different. First of all, it features Ilhan Omar, who is by her very profile an important leader of Congress. She is a member of the Squad, which is clearly your area of expertise these days with that book. But how is this different? How is this important? What are the new lines we need to know about this particular letter?
So this is bigger in the sense that it has kind of more members of Congress on it. It's even to get 11 people together on a letter involving something like this is a bit of a challenge, particularly with everything else that Congress is dealing with at the moment. And it raises to a much higher level the concern that Democrats in Congress are expressing about human rights abuses in Pakistan to the State Department, and it demands that they do something that is in their mandate, which is to examine and study whether or not Pakistan is or the aid that the U.S. is giving to Pakistan is in accordance with the so-called Leahy Law or Leahy Act, which essentially says the United States cannot be funding entities that are engaged in human rights abuses. Now, the United States is often engaged in funding entities that are engaged in human rights abuses, and oftentimes is the creation of entities that are built to commit human rights abuses. So who ultimately gets hit with the Leahy Law and who doesn't is often a political question. And so what this does is it elevates the politics of this to say that there are there's a significant element of the Democratic base that wants this to be taken seriously.
Right. So follow up on that. Humor me. Which other countries or organizations have been hit by this particular law that the writers of this letter want to put Pakistan in that frame? Which other countries?
Lots of them. So Bolivia, Venezuela, sometimes Haiti will get hit with it. You'll also have Leahy Act implementation in selective ways. So you might say to Colombia, okay, these particular elements of the military we find are engaged with drug trafficking and are sponsoring paramilitaries and engaged in massacres in the countryside, and so no U.S. funding can go to these elements within that. And so that's also an option. It doesn't mean that you're cutting off all funding. It can be just say, all right, this unit over here is engaged in horrific abuses. It can't be funded.
Right. Now, you have a analyst in that story saying that there has been tacit U.S. support of the Pakistani military as it has gone to work over the last 18 months. Well, it's been at work for the last seven decades, but it's really gone to town with the constitution, human rights, etc. in that country. How do you define that contradiction? On the one hand, fine, there's a letter now in play, and there's influential members of Congress doing what they're supposed to do, which is urge the administration for better oversight of a country like Pakistan. But on the other hand, there is tacit support. We've talked about that in this show. You've reported on that so many times in the last several months. How do you see that play out? Will this have an impact? Will this make the White House, the State Department, the Pentagon budge?
You could see it in the same way as their current Israeli posture. The Biden administration is it's offered essentially full-throated support for that war effort, while you have some members of Congress urging them to call for a ceasefire instead. So as that number is down, I think around 34 members of Congress at this point. And so that's a small enough number that the administration doesn't feel pressured necessarily. But as that number grows, then it comes with a little bit more of a political cost to continue that policy. And so I think the State Department and the Biden administration generally are want to continue the status quo Pakistan policy as it is, but they don't want to do it so badly that they would pay significant political cost. Now, 11 members of Congress is not that high of a political cost, but it's an opening. It's the first kind of real breach among progressive Democrats to say, no, this is a significant issue for us. And so if that grows, then it puts a cost. And so then the question is, how valuable is it to the United States to be tacitly supporting this repression? And if it's only something that's a top 50 priority, then you might have the State Department say, all right, you know what, this is too egregious. The Constitution is being too trampled upon. The roundups have reached excessive proportions, and it's too embarrassing for us at this point. So you have to, and then you fill in the blank of what they have to do to remedy that. And the members of Congress, urge that everyone be able to participate in free and fair elections, which would be kind of a top demand, along with, of course, not imprisoning political opponents.
Right. Now, you also mention the letter mentions, and I'm going to quote, that we further request that future security assistance to be withheld until Pakistan has moved decisively towards the restoration of constitutional order, including by holding free and fair elections in which all parties are able to participate freely. Now, the update from Pakistan is that the election dates have been announced. The PTI is being allowed to run its rallies, even though they are limited. Of course, its chief is in jail, facing trial after trial, shrouded in transparency. But it seems that the elections will happen. It seems that the PTI, or whatever's left of it, will be allowed to participate. But the runway has been set for the other guy, Nawaz Sharif, the military's favorite these days, to come in. So it seems like they're going to get their elections, but they're not going to be free and fair. How will that play out in Washington? Will people at the State Department say, all right, check, election done. We don't need to worry too much about or get into too many details about how they were, well, not free and fair. They were quite horrible, actually.
It does seem like that the administration, the State Department's hope is that they'll be able to check that box. The members of Congress who are behind this letter would not consider those free and fair just because the party's allowed on. If their chief is not allowed on, they would consider that to be falling short of those demands. So the question is, do they have enough political weight and to bring to bear against the State Department? The letter also talked about the secret trials and the way that the Constitution is being undermined in that way, and specifically referenced, among others, Imran Khan's trial, and urged the State Department to send representatives to monitor those trials. So that's something that I'd be curious for your take on, whether Pakistan would allow that if the State Department even said, okay, you know what, fine, we'll do that.
Yeah, that was going to be my question to you. I find it quite interesting that that's what they've demanded. I mean, just last week or so, they've opened up Khan's trial for his family, not the press. And in the next few days or so, they might open it for the press. And that will create a completely different type of furor once the press is inside. It'll be obviously, if it's open to the press, the next step is for it to be open to international monitors. That could include representatives of the State Department, or even perhaps, I mean, US Congress members if they want in. But I'm just curious about, in the long pattern of history, Pakistan has had a lot of trials, some open, some not open. But what, I mean, not that that's ever really delivered justice to the people in those trials. But I'm just curious, is there precedent for the US monitoring international trials like this? Remind my viewers, if you can recall, when did this happen in the past?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that, and there is a real kind of colonial overtone to it, that comes through with the sense that we have to be there babysitting this. But the signal that's being sent is a very clear one that these members of Congress don't trust that this is a fair trial. They specifically warn that they're concerned that their death penalty might be involved. So I think in general, they're trying to just raise the cost to the Pakistani government, Pakistani military of doing this. But I'm not. That's a good question. I will ask around. I'm not sure. I certainly, the U.S. likes to send, election monitors, and when the U.S. is, the U.S. has done a lot in South and Central America that they dub to be, anti-corruption measures, which means that, instead of a drug trafficker being your patron, now the United States is your patron, and that's similar in that sense. But I'm not sure about in the courtrooms.
Right. Politically speaking, as a Washington insider, war game this for me. Yeah, you're obviously looking at a situation in Washington where Pakistan is not front and center of any conversation. Obviously, it's Israel's war on Gaza. But beyond that, even Russia versus Ukraine has been shifted in the background of that conflict. And yet, you have a very high-profile member of Congress, Ilhan Omar, who's been often accused of targeting her policies against Israel and not against other countries, Islamic countries in particular, because, well, she is openly Muslim, proudly Muslim. But importantly, other members of the squad, for example, Rashida Tlaib, have been, they're in trouble, aren't they, for voicing their opinion about Israel. So is this a good time, I'm wondering, from a political perspective, for Omar to speak up about Pakistan? Is this a very good time? It's almost opportunistic for her to say, hey, I don't just call out Israel, I'm also calling out other countries. Look, I just called out Pakistan. How do you explain this politically about Omar's game plan here?
I don't think that applies here because that criticism of Omar has always ignored the fact that she's among the most outspoken critics in Congress of Saudi Arabia and of the United Arab Emirates, among others. So I think a lot of that criticism is just kind of Islamophobic, that they hear her criticism of Israel and they just don't hear the other criticism. And I think for the critics who are going to make that argument, they're not going to hear this either. So even if it was an opportunistic, cynical move to kind of cover her flank there, it wouldn't even work because they wouldn't even hear it. I think that there has been a lot of concern circulating in Congress over the last several months over what's going on in Pakistan. But you're right that it's not a top tier issue. Even Ukraine has kind of been bumped aside, and Pakistan is never, Pakistan is very rarely at the forefront of anybody's mind in Washington.
Right. So last bits, because this obviously draws into the larger conversation in Washington, Ryan. 11 people have written this letter. There have been letters before. They've come and they've gone. This one's different, clearly, because it cites a very particular law. The law connects directly to the cutting off of aid with the Pakistani military, which really runs the show over there. But let's play this out in D.C. What will it take for this letter to become something? It's 11 congresspersons now, but what happens, what needs to happen for this letter in a Washington dominated by Israel versus Gaza? What needs to happen for this letter to go somewhere in terms of policy procedures actually being executed?
The way that these letters go from just one little news item to a real kind of pressure campaign is if members of Congress start hearing from people in their districts, hey, why have you not signed this letter? Why did you not sign this letter? We want you sending a similar message to the State Department. And if that starts happening and it becomes a news event in the like local district, and the question is whether where do they stand on this issue? Then members of Congress have to start studying it, and they have to decide. Then they have to make a political choice. Absent that pressure, they don't have to make a choice. They can just not say anything, which is their preference.
Right. And before I let you go, Ryan, I know you're watching a couple other spaces when it comes to Pakistan, and not to rain on that parade, which might be upcoming. But what are you working on? What could our audiences gain from the Intercept in the coming days?
Well, I know you've done some good reporting on the role that India's carved out for itself around the world, and with targeted assassinations. Canada famously kicking off international uproar with that allegation. But I think that there's a lot more to that story. You've been pulling on some of that string. We'll pull on some of that as well, and we're still kicking around some other stories that can't quite get into yet, but we haven't looked away yet. That's for sure.
Right, and as an old hand in this game, what are you making of the Imran Khan trial so far?
I don't know. To me, it's the whole thing is absurd. So it's hard for me to get past that base level sense of the absurdity of it. He was prime minister. He waved around a piece of paper that reflected that either was or was to stand in for a cable that implicated the U.S. in this push with Don Liu to get the no confidence vote. That they would try to turn that into a crime is just completely absurd to me. My understanding is they've since located the cipher, and so even the claim that the cipher was missing no longer stands. What's your sense of how it's going?
Well, just like you, I'm a documentarian of the absurd. That's what's happening here. You're trying the only man in the country who can declassify a national security document for waving it in the air. I mean, technically, he could do that. He was the only man in 250 million people who could do that. But it's almost as if that doesn't matter at this point. There's 4 cases, as you know. One of them is Cyphergate, which you reported on. But the other 3 cases, one of them involved his wife and her friend, as well as the country's most powerful real estate tycoon. That's one case. That's almost 200 million pounds, which have arrived in Pakistan, but it's about how they were used. That's one. Another case is about some watches that he may have resold, even though that case seems to be dead in the water. So yeah, it's speaking of pulling on strings, it seems like these guys are trying to pull on strings. But at this point, the larger political picture seems to be that Khan has to go away for at least this round of elections,
right?
Till they're happy with him again. However, all of that is complicated by a new series of laws which allow the military to potentially try him directly. That's a sword of Damocles hanging over not just Khan's head, but over the heads of all political prisoners who have been incarcerated since the beginning of this year. So yeah, I mean, if the military starts trying people, all bets are off.
Right.
But that's a card they seem to be willing to use, but they're not too worried about it, because a lot of the judicial system is already in their pocket. It's dark times. But I'm looking forward to your story for next week when it comes to India.
Excellent.